Dear colleagues and guests, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I'm quite pleased after the long break to start our first session in this academic year. And today is September 10th, 2021, 11 a.m. Moscow time. And we're beginning the panel session for the defense of the thesis by Gennady Dyk. The thesis is submitted for the academic degree of the candidate of technical sciences. The specialization is 235, mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks. The topic of the thesis is rational composition of services in transport logistics systems. And I'll mention the specialization code a bit later. Previously it was titled 051311, mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks. So under the order issued by the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University as of January 4th, 2021, number 6084/1, I, Alexander Bogdanov, Doctor of Sciences in Physics and Mathematics, Professor of the Department of Fundamental Informatics and Distributed Systems of St. Petersburg State University, was appointed the chairperson of this dissertation board. The order also approved the candidacies of other members of our board, and let me introduce them. Nadezhda Shogoleva, Doctor of Technical Sciences, Associate Professor, Department of Computer Modeling and Multiprocessor Systems of St. Petersburg State University. Vladimir Korenkov, Doctor of Technical Sciences, Director of the Laboratory for Information Technologies of the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research. And we also have some members who are working remotely, namely Yuri Gorbachev, Doctor of Sciences in Physics and Mathematics, Senior Researcher, Head of the Code and Technologies Research Department. Do you see us and hear us? Yes, I do. And Alexei Klementov, Doctor of Sciences in Physics and Mathematics, Professor of the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, Switzerland. Do you hear and see us? Yes, I do. Okay, thank you. We also have our candidate for the degree, Gennady Dyk. And we also have the thesis supervisor, Alexander Degtyaryov, Doctor of Technical Sciences, Associate Professor, Professor of the Department of Computer Modeling and Multiprocessor Systems of St. Petersburg State University. I would like to inform you that the panel session of our dissertation board is being recorded and broadcast on the St. Petersburg State University website, and it is also interpreted from Russian into English and vice versa. Currently, we have an email address posted on the page with live broadcast of the board session, and all the listeners can submit their questions to Mr. Dyk online. The questions regarding the thesis or the scientific discussion. These questions will be forwarded to me by our technical service, and I will read them out during the discussion. Questions must be related to the presentation and the content of the thesis, and do not forget to give your name and position if you submit a question. Those questions that have nothing to do with the scientific discussion, with the thesis text, will not be voiced. Now a few words about the specialization code. Gennady Dyk submitted an application for the defense of his thesis with the specialization 051311, mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks. However, in order to execute the order of the Ministry of Science and Higher Education as of February 24, 2021, number 118, on the approval of the academic specialization nomenclature for scientific degrees, an amendment of the regulation on academic boards approved by the Ministry of Education and Science as of November 10th, 2017, number 1093. A new nomenclature of scientific specialization was introduced. Given that our board was approved for the same specialization, 051311, mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks, for the defense of the thesis by Gennady Dig. So the board was set according to the rules, and in the new nomenclature this specialization code was changed. Therefore, taking into account the petition of our applicant as of August 13, 2021, number 3305109, about the change of specialization code from 051311 mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks of the old nomenclature to 235 mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks in the new nomenclature. And taking into account the fact that his thesis completely corresponds to the scientific specialization of the new nomenclature, we changed the order on the approval of the thesis academic board. And in terms of the code, our board was approved for the defense of Gennady Dig's thesis and specialization 235 mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks. That's the order of St. Petersburg State University as of August 19th, 2021, number 8141/1. So, dear colleagues, any remarks on the issue? None. Okay. So, a thesis by Gennady Dig is submitted for the academic degree of the candidate of technical sciences. The specialization is 235 mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks. The topic of the thesis is rational composition of services in transport logistics systems. Under the order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, approved by local normative acts, and the session of the dissertation board is valid, providing 2/3 of the appointed board members are present. And the total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. Our dissertation board consists of 5 people. Everyone is with us today, including 2 members of the board that are working remotely. We have a multimedia connection with all the members of the board, as well as with our candidate for the degree. Therefore, we have a quorum. So our agenda is as follows. The session should not last more than 2 hours. And first comes the chairman's presentation about the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their conformity with the requirements, and chairman's replies to questions, if any. 5 minutes are given for that. Then the candidate's presentation providing an overview and findings of the research. 20 minutes for that. Then questions to the candidate regarding the presentation, no more than 2 minutes per question. The candidate's replies to the questions, 10 minutes for all the questions. Then the reports on the thesis. The board members will be taking the floor in turns to provide their reviews and questions. And so that's 10 minutes per speaker. Then the chairman's report on the thesis, also 10 minutes for that. Then we're going to listen to the candidates' comments about the reports on the thesis and replies to the questions, 20 minutes for all. Then we're going to have an open discussion. Anyone present at the defense may state their positions or ask questions on the thesis. 2 minutes per speaker. And I kindly ask you to fill in the registration form and introduce yourself before I give you the floor if you want to comment. Then the chairman will ask the questions submitted during the broadcast via our website. Then the candidates' replies to the questions, 2 minutes per question. Then the presentation of the candidate's thesis supervisor, 3 minutes for that. Then it will be possible to hold a 5-minute discussion before the open balloting on conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. The discussion of these results is not broadcast. Then we're going to have open balloting, vote counting, and recording of the results into the protocol. Then we're going to make a decision on whether to confer the academic degree or not. And finally, we're going to listen to the candidate's closing speech, no more than 2 minutes for that. Any questions and comments on our agenda? If there are no objections, let us proceed. But before we do that, I kindly ask you to turn off or to switch off the sound on your mobile phones. Thank you. So, and the thesis by Gennady Dyk for the academic degree of the candidate of technical sciences, the specialization 235, mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks, is titled Rational Composition of Services in Transport Logistics Systems. The thesis was approved for the defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University, issued May 13, 2021, number 4820/1. Mr. Dyk has prepared his dissertation at St. Petersburg State University, and Professor Alexander Degtyaryov, Doctor of Technical Sciences, Associate Professor, Professor of the Department of Computer Modeling and Multiprocessor Systems of St. Petersburg State University, is the thesis supervisor. 6 published works describe the research findings, and these include 3 papers published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science, and 1 paper in publications indexed in Web of Science and Scopus. The candidate has submitted the full set of documents to the Academic Secretary, and the above-mentioned documents comply with Item 12 of Section 3 of the Order on the Procedure of Granting Academic Degrees at St. Petersburg State University. As far as I'm informed, all the documents comply with the requirements and are found in the certification file of the candidate for the degree, and the curator of the defense, member of the Department of Dissertation Board Support, present here, has all the copies. So that's Natalia Karpova. And before I give the floor to our candidate for the degree, I would like to ask the members of the board if you have any general questions to the candidate for the degree, and is there a need to consider the whole list of documents submitted by the candidate for the degree? No. Okay, thank you. Now we're going to listen to the short report by Gennady. Distinguished Chairman, distinguished members of the dissertation board. So the report will be delivered on the thesis, Rational Composition of Services in Transport Logistics Systems. This thesis considers the issue of the establishment of program infrastructure in information systems of logistic enterprises. The relevance of the topic is associated with the fact that the analysis of the current information systems demonstrated a range of drawbacks in functioning according to Appendix 1. And in order to resolve the goals of the reduction of temporal, resource and financial costs for enterprises, we need to introduce such methods and technologies that would allow to adapt information systems in short periods of time with minimal cost without the reduction of productivity, reliability, safety, and control, and scalability as well. As for scientific importance and practical importance, they are given here on this slide. Along with that, I would like to mention practical value, because the range of developed software is quite applicable in other spheres of business. And the goal of the study is defined as the improvement and expansion of the methods of the construction of program infrastructure based on SOA, and thus will resolve the following goals that you see on the slide. And as for Article 5, the considered software was implemented in a range of logistics companies on Visual Fox and Microsoft SQL packages, but currently, based on the corrected material, we adapt our program to more contemporary software. And first of all, let us consider the basic notions like transport logistical systems and 6 rules of logistics in TLS and transportation logistics systems. The goals should be resolved in a complex, and thus we organize information interaction and the control of information flow that goes simultaneously. Sometimes it's a bit ahead, of a range of operations, and you see all the operations on slide 5. In order to organize this interaction, any program infrastructure of transport logistics enterprise has a range of information systems and automation sets and automation systems of control and automated workstations that are different in functionality, in goals, and the level of connection organization. And this structure is received on the basis of analysis and on our experience of constructing such systems. Analysis of functional opportunities of the studied information systems according to Appendix 1 allows us to detect the bottlenecks in functioning. And there is a need to mention that according to Article 5, these drawbacks, the main problem here in automation is the gap between the current business processes and automation means. At the same time, it should be emphasized that the current trends of the development of any enterprise show that the growing dependence of business processes on the reliability of program infrastructure requires a systemic approach in setting both program infrastructure and the architecture of business overall. Therefore, the development of or re-engineering of the old current program infrastructure depends not just on the planned reorganization of automated workstations and fine-tuning of equipment, but also on the establishment of enterprise business architecture. And those drawbacks lead to the need to organize modernization and update of program infrastructure. And as a solution, we offer the transition to SOA technology or program service-oriented infrastructure. So we should not consider just applied software, but rather everything in combination. So this choice of SOA was based on this correlation that you see on the slide between the principles of TLS development and SOA. And from the point of view of SOA, this infrastructure is divided into life cycles of components, and such a composition allows us not just to swiftly react to restructuring of the business processes, but also it makes the program infrastructure process a more reliable one and more forecastable. And thus we offered an algorithm of transition of program infrastructure to program service-oriented infrastructure, and luckily the service-oriented approach allows us to use ready-made components. And further study of the issue on the transfer to this technique leads us to the need to assess all the results of the produced methodology and the construction of program infrastructure of the enterprise. So it's done in order to respond to the main question: what's the price and the goal of these transformations? First of all, the assessment of the quality of control of huge logistics systems that requires a lot of interaction between the interests of multiple parties. So this assessment is based on efficiency, and this efficiency characterizes not the system as such, but rather specific processes that are carried out during operations. And within the framework of this study, we offered to choose a different method of assessment. So the efficiency of some other transformations is assessed through the efficiency of solution of the main task, making an emphasis on timeliness and the cost of the delivery. And in order to meet this goal, it's expedient to use a mathematical model, and the one that you see on the slide, where we apply the standard mode of numerical characteristics for the system, and thus taking into account the limitations and the mathematical description of the model. The program infrastructure can be given as a like that, and KR vector is key here. And as for business processes, first of all, we should define them. We should carry out decomposition of the functional blocks of business processes up until components, and it leads us to the business function, or to the so-called services that give us the result. And we established that the same function is represented not just by services, but rather by suppliers with different functional and technological parameters of services. And the question is on the choice of the services here, on the formation of a certain set or combination that will be responsible to that will respond to the needs. And according to the rules of transportation organizations, first of all, we choose the services according to their functionality. Then we consider further choice of these services according to technological parameters. And on the slide you see the algorithm of service composition. And in the study we also offered to add up the stage of human-machine preference choice. And this goal is called the multi-criterion choice goal. And working with multi-criterion problems, we consider three objects given on this slide. First of all, the set of solutions, vector criterion, and the preference of our decision maker. And based on the vector criterion and the relevance of preferences, we should form a variety of solutions. And in this situation, the methods of solution are divided into two groups. Either we should reduce the number of indicators of quality, or we should reduce the alternatives on the initial set. And thus we form the Pareto set. And this principle is met in the number of practical cases where the alternative is assessed to dubious indicators, and it allows us to reduce the set, and the decision maker makes the final choice, which is significant for transportation logistics systems where humans are to make the final decision. And in order to assess the program infrastructure in transportation logistics among numerous indicators, we use technological indicators of information systems. And here we offer to stop to be based on three basic indicators: practical studies, for example, the time of processing of the query, then cost and accessibility. And choosing these indicators, we can decide on the problem setting. And in order to resolve the problem, we offer to use the method of choosing IT service composition based on the algorithm that you see here on the slide in the considered material. We were talking about the methods of the resolution of logistics issue when everything is clear and known, without some ambiguous options. And in real life, in logistics, it's something that never happens. And when resolving transportation logistics issues, the decision makers face three types of uncertainty. And in order to assess the quantitative and qualitative characteristics of alternatives, the goal of the choice of the service should use mathematical set of a mathematical fuzzy set, and this will add up the additional software infrastructure model to resolve our goal. And further studies show the presence of uncertainties not dependent on IT services. Therefore, we see the drop of opportunity to use determined or variable models, and in this case the shift to program infrastructure methods can be based on linguistic skills, and it has a number of advantages. In this case, in order to assess the solutions of choice of the correct composition, we offer to use fuzzy model that is based on fuzzy requirements to services and fuzzy information on parameters of the service. And as a basis for modeling here, we offer to use modernized tuple of for the modeling. And in this case, you see the final set of goal of the problem. And what's important, we take the structure of criterion of the assessment of quality as quality services as a basis, according to GOST and ISO MAC 9126/93, and this assessment is based on 6 factors on the slide. And when setting a model of IT services, let's presume that decision maker is based on cost of the provided service set. In this case, in order to resolve this issue of assessment, it's expedient to use a model with a combination of ownership, of joint ownership, costs because it fully describes all the situation on the enterprise. And as a result, we offered an algorithm that defined the set of IT services that have a minimal assessment of combined costs that met the quality requirements. And shifting to practical implementation of the material, we should mention that the most general program infrastructure is given here on the slide. Why it looks so simple? Because as the analysis of the functioning systems showed, everything is based on ARM, and the complex of automation means it just started and was just launched quite recently. And here are the major provisions that you see on the slide. And the program infrastructure included two subsystems, information processing and service manager. Introduction of these subsystems into the control contour allows us to transform the program infrastructure of the enterprise into program service-oriented infrastructure. And here you see the structural option of the service-oriented infrastructure that's based using SOA. And these are the modules that we try to introduce into logistic enterprises, where we used our software. And the conclusions are here, given here on the slide, and we can say the following thing. First of all, we carried out the analysis of program infrastructure of state-of-the-art logistics enterprises. We've substantiated the methods of rational choice of composition of services. Then we consider the mathematical model of programs service-oriented infrastructure, and we introduce the fragments of applications as well as we apply to the mathematical model. So here are the published works. So that's the correspondence code, and here you see state registry for the programs developed and the implementation acts in a number of companies with whom we had some joint work and cooperation. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Any questions to our candidate for the degree, except for the questions that you've given in your reviews? My question is as follows. The fourth chapter that was dedicated to the practical application of your approach, you don't describe the architecture and structure of what was introduced in detail, what you introduced in these three logistic companies. Could you please shortly explain what subsystems, or maybe the entire comprehensive system was used, or maybe some parts of it? Well, the main problem was in processing of incoming information. Therefore, we paid attention to the data input data block, to remote acquisition of information from cargo passage, from all the processes. Therefore, it was important to get this service from state companies or commercial structures that are already working with such software that could provide us with options. So we had an opportunity to gather some information regarding the cost of the transshipment according to the certain parameters, to certain geographic data, what transformations should be carried out considering the setting of paths, of movement of the routes. And there was this salesman goal also. As for Dexter algorithm, it was used to establish the correct route to resolve the problem, and certainly there were certain problems in place. And as for calculation and analytical block, it was taken into account during the processing, and it was yes, thank you, I understood. Yes, you know, I can tell a lot about it. Okay. Yes, I have a question. I have a question on slide 17. Okay. No, the slide on which you give the algorithm. I had the previous presentation. Maybe it has some additional slide. That's the slide where you give the algorithm to chapter 2. Yes, that's it. Could you please tell me what the algorithm of Pareto set you use, and what narrowing parameters for the Pareto set did you use? Well, as I mentioned, just a bit. Well, the algorithm was used for two options of solutions. So we either reduce the number of indicators, because the presented number of indicators was quite huge, and we were mostly based on value parameters, on service cost parameters, on the opportunity to consider the time of service provision, and also we've taken into account such thing as functional parameters. And also we considered alternatives. Well, something like that. And as for the region of compromise, it was formed at the following level. Okay, thank you. Other questions? No. Natalia, any external reviews for the thesis? None. Okay. Now we are going to listen to our members of the board, and I have one remark. The thing is that the reviews were already submitted before the specialization code was changed. So, dear colleagues, do you agree that we recognize our reviews as the ones that correspond to the new specialization code 235? Yes, we do. Okay. Now let's listen to the members of the board. And I offer to start with the colleagues who are working remotely. So, Yuri, you have the floor. Yuri, please turn on the sound. The microphone. Yes, I found it. I beg your pardon. I don't want to go into details and repeat the basic provisions of the candidate for the degree, and in my assessment I was based on the universal provision that PhD thesis, candidate's thesis is a qualification work. To my mind, the goal was achieved above the limit in all aspects, argumentation, the goal, the problem set. So to my mind, this is high quality work. On the other hand, there is a range of remarks that are mostly associated with documentation, because you know all these abbreviations, numerous abbreviations without the list of abbreviations. This was quite a torture. You know, you can do it, but it's quite complicated. Next remark is associated with the fact that information systems, foreign information systems, are described quite shortly, and I can't say that I'm familiar with them. I believe there are more of them, judging by publications. And the third remark is the assessment of aggregate costs. To my mind, we could be based on the productivity of the infrastructure, information infrastructure. But still, I believe the author surely deserves the degree of candidate of technical sciences in the specialization that we're now working with, and I have no other remarks. Okay, thank you. As it was mentioned that we have a lot in common in the reviews of different colleagues, I offered to answer all the remarks at once, so now we're going to listen to you other members of the board. Alexei, please. So it's always nice to say nice words, and it's hard to say something unpleasant, as well as it doesn't. People don't like to hear them as well. So the work is based on a very good article of Diktarov and Dig. The article is quite good. It covers everything. Other articles, I believe, are secondary to this first article. The work is written with negligence, and this negligence is found everywhere in mistakes, in logics, so you can trace it along the work. And the work also repeats the studies that were carried out previously, up to the description of methods, of algorithms and formulas and conclusions. And I cannot judge about the level of St. Petersburg State University, and I trust the colleague who said that this limit was even lower. To my mind, this work needs further development, and scientific importance is not obvious. I really pity that the report did not reassure me. Okay, thank you. Now we're going to listen to the colleagues who are present here. So please, Vladimir. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. My assessment of the work is that it's quite relevant. The topic is relevant. It's quite complicated, and the problems of implementation of such services in transportation logistics, that's quite a hard and comprehensive goal. And a lot was done here. A lot of works, a lot of systems proposed, and the approaches that are demonstrated here, they correspond to some elements of novelty and comprehensive character. The approach of SOA is applicable here. When 20 years ago we saw the development of this approach, when you could create different complex distributed systems as a set of services, certainly it gave an opportunity to resolve such comprehensive problems. And certainly I have some comments. Mostly they are dealing with the documentation. I agree with this fact of negligence in writing. Previously, I wanted to say a few words about the remarks that I did not include in my formal review. First of all, the SOA approach, as I mentioned, it's interesting, but there are other interesting approaches as well, especially for this problem. You mentioned multi-agent systems, especially intellectually multi-agent systems, and here I believe there are good prospects in this direction. Second is, I've already asked this question on the practical value, and I was satisfied with the answer. But unluckily, this part associated with practical implementation of the results in 3 large companies, they were not mentioned, and it would be nice to describe them in details, because they would disclose this practical value of the works performed, and certainly this was lacking. And as for the comments on documentation, I've just decided to comment on several ones of them. No information on the passport of specialization that was mentioned right now. And now a few words about the analysis. And I continue to the comments of Yuri. The analysis of current systems is performed with a rather low quality because everything was given in the appendix, and the appendix is well, an information appendix, and it's better to have some information analysis in the text. What systems you use, what architectures you use. So it would be nice to have this classification in the text rather than in the appendix, where you list all the systems writing their positive aspects. So this was and Robic as well. Then so there are a lot of questions about this documentation, but still, I believe that this work is prepared at a rather good level. The results have theoretical and methodological and practical value, and I believe that regardless of the comments, this work deserves a positive mark, and I recommend to support this work because it satisfies the requirements of the dissertation board in this new specialization. Mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks. Okay, thank you. Nadezhda? Well, first of all, I would like to mention the relevance of the work by Gennady that is aimed at the improvement of efficiency of the functioning of logistical enterprise. I believe that the work is quite a timely one. It was published when we found ourselves in a situation when you need to deliver everything on a timely basis, and I believe the approach that he used is of interest, the use of SOA architecture. And from the point of view of engineering, I believe this algorithm is interesting, the algorithm that allows us not just to use the novel services for programming, but also the existing ones. And I believe this practical value is very important. And I completely agree with my colleague that it would be expedient to pay more attention to that in the work, but luckily I had a chance to talk to the author and to assess his contribution into this field. And in order not to repeat the colleagues, I'll shortly say that, like my colleagues, many of my comments are dealing with the style and the peculiarities of program implementation. To my mind, these comments were taken into account in the report and in the presentation. I believe that my remarks do not compromise the overall high value of the work, and it corresponds with requirements of Order 6821/1 on the award of the academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the candidate for the degree deserves the degree of the candidate of technical sciences in this new specialization 235 mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks. Thank you. Okay, now I take the floor First of all, I take the floor as a member of the board, and then I'll draw conclusions. As for my opinion on the thesis, it is as follows. Basically, I had a chance to see this evolution of this field of science. In the beginning of the 90s, we had interaction with Higger, the Higger company that provides trailer transshipments across Germany. And the first system they introduced, I was a consultant there, and our guys worked with them as well. And then there was this period of transmodal corridors when you had to do the transfer from the ferries to railroad to trailers and so on. And then we actively worked with Flextronics that provided the software, but the work was that we sent our students there, and the students were to defend their master's thesis. We needed to control their work, so I used to control this work. And I see that indeed that's a lively changing structure that is intensively developing, and it's clear that today we need to introduce something new in it, because we've seen this period of transportation corridors. I'm not talking about this well-known transport corridors like GREAT or Silk Route or T-Route, our transport corridors, north-south and the South Transportation Corridor. They require new approaches, and here I have nothing to add up. Everything is quite in compliance, everything is quite correct and much needed. I made my remarks as well for this work, and partially the author answered them, and the one remark that I still doubt about is that I agree with Vladimir Vasilievich that SOA maybe it's a bit lofty for logistics, it's a bit more complicated. Isn't it just like using a rifle to shoot sparrows? So why SOA? But maybe that's a comment to the academic supervisor. But still, I see the high value in this work, and I agree with Yuri that we are mostly to assess this as a qualification work. And to my mind, if we take away all this, well, certainly I agree with the comments. First I tried to write down all the typos, but I understood that it's useless because they are so numerous. Still, I believe that the thesis by Gennady corresponds with the requirements given to the defenses, and I believe that Mr. Dick deserves the award of the academic degree of the candidate of technical sciences in specialization 235 mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks, and I believe that Article 11 of the above-mentioned order is not violated. Now, I would like to give the floor to Gennady for his answers, and then I'll finalize. Well, in order to unify, to bring together all the remarks, I would like to start with the remarks submitted by Professor Klementov. As for this detailed disclosure of this miscorrespondence between the current IT infrastructure and the current processes, I try to describe this issue correctly, but still I agree, because maybe it would be nice to describe the structure of business processes and then to give the possible solutions that would be successful from the point of view of analysis of the current systems, where we have this movement. The basics of this drawbacks is that the systems are created by other people but exploited by some people and exploited by other people, and as a result, those goals that are set for the implementation of this system in accordance to some regulatory documents, they are taken into account by people who construct systems, and those who exploit them, they are trying to make their position known, and this gap sometimes leads to the abolition in the use of this working system. And as for the increase of efficiency using the drop of services for IT infrastructure, certainly it's quite natural. Less investment you need to make, the lesser are the costs. But I offered a different method of assessment that would take into account the opportunities to resolve the infrastructure problems. And I dwelled upon 2 points, like cost and timeliness of delivery. I agree with the fact that there is this mixed narrative and mistakes, but they are associated with these gaps in time because I've written this thesis for many years, and when you read something new, you just go into details, you then take a break for half a year. Certainly it was not easy because I started working in 2009. As for engineering, it was used in the use of concept of radical modes of system, unlike other ordinary systems. It was an attempt to rethink and to construct everything from scratch, regardless of the difficulties. And in my work, I have a lot of references to the materials of other authors. I don't doubt that, I don't question that. But maybe luckily, or for some reason, I had an opportunity to get acquainted with this information, because being based on nothing, it's not always expedient to start the system from scratch, but everywhere in my work I made references to the works that I used. And as for this question, why SOA, it's not that complicated, but it's still distributed, and maybe it's not quite popular on the territory of the Russian Federation, because we just see the start of introduction of digital technologies, thanks to which we can move forward. We can use to multifunctional service center. We have no such routine that we had during the customs clearance that we used to have. We don't have this routine that we used to have when filing documentation on cargo passage. Thus, I believe that this use of SOA and the opportunity to use certain registers and structures of acquired data, some formalization of this flow, taking into account these opportunities, this approach would be of interest. And as for multi-agent systems, these are most widely developed field of artificial intelligence. It's not in the stage of establishment, but still it's under development. And its application here, when the logistics company has several workstations and remote access, it would be less expedient here, but this decentralized distribution and the use of opportunities to contact the system, taking into account the digitalization and the presence of broadband connection, it would allow to practical use SOA in the construction of program infrastructure in logistics enterprises. And as far as I understand, you agree with other remarks. Yes, I agree with all of them. Natalia, do we have any questions submitted via our website? No. None. Okay. Now I have an opportunity to give the floor to the thesis supervisor, Professor Degtyaryov. Dear colleagues, thank you so much for this detailed discussion. A lot of remarks that were voiced. Well, I'm ready to take them for myself, and for my work. Maybe that's stimulated by the fact that that's the longest period of supervision that I ever had. We started working in 2009, and essentially those basic ideas that are described and are formed here, they were born then in 2009, 2010. This service-oriented architecture was then quite a novelty, and you could test it. And this thesis certainly should be defended 5 or 6 years ago, because at that period of time it was most relevant. But suddenly we had several objective reasons. For example, Gennady came. He was not a PhD student. He was a candidate for the degree, the only candidate for the degree from our faculty that we had. And there were a lot of problems associated with the fact that he had to pass exams and pass them once again. Then it turned out that his philosophy exam was not satisfying the contemporary requirements, because now it's philosophy and methodology. So there were a lot of such formal issues that delayed us for 2 years. And it was already mentioned that this thesis was written in 5 or 6 stages, and after reading the candidate for the degree, and I, got so used to the text of the thesis, sometimes I just look at the text and think, wow, did we let it go like that? No, I then understand that we've already corrected it. So these are the comments to me. But still, I want to ask you to draw attention to the fact that there's a real practical work here in place. That's a candidate's thesis for the degree of the candidate of technical sciences. What was done was implemented. What was done is working now. And sometimes something that is not quite in-depth scientific works quite well in practice. So we've chosen specific components that can be introduced and the ones that can be supported and provided. And the introduction is proven by that, as well as those results of intellectual activity, like, for example, the registry of programs for computers that were shown here. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for the specific discussions and for the attention to this work. And I still, being based on what I've already mentioned, I believe that this work still deserves the degree of the candidate of technical sciences, because that's a qualification work. Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, before we close our discussion, we have an opportunity to say something, maybe to ask additional questions. Does anyone want to say something? Does anyone want to say something? Okay, the microphone. Okay, here we stop the discussion. I know it's 1 minute to 12. I know I have to address all the members of the board. If there are any comments on our session, did everything work from the point of view of the equipment? Did you hear and see everything? Or do you have any comments on the procedure? Yuri? None. Alexei? No? No comments about that. Vladimir? No. Nadezhda? No. Okay, microphone. Okay. Now let's shift to the next article on our agenda, the vote. I have a question to the members of the board. Before the vote, we can hold a closed session, closed 5-minute discussion. Do we need this discussion or no? Yes. No. Okay.
Я бы просил,
Well, I would ask for it. Okay.
если можно.
Okay. Okay, then I ask to turn off the broadcast. So, dear colleagues, now we'll shift. Yes, I need to get a confirmation that we all hear and see each other. Now, I raise a question on the award of the academic degree of the candidate of technical sciences in specialization 235 mathematical and software support for computers, complexes and computer networks to Gennady Dyk. And now we're going to have an open balloting. And I would like to remind you that the decision of the dissertation board on the award of the academic degree is considered valid if more than half of the board members, but not fewer than 3 people, voted in favor. That's in conformity with section 23 of the order. And I start with our external participants. Yuri, what's your opinion? I vote for the award of the academic degree. Alexei Klementov. I vote against the award of the academic degree. Vladimir, I vote for. Okay, thank you. Microphone. Yes, Nadezhda, I vote for as well, and I vote for the award of the academic degree as well. I, Alexander Bogdanov, draw the conclusion. 4 members of the board voted for the award of the academic degree, 1 member voted against, and no one abstained from the vote. Therefore, we take a decision to award the academic degree of the candidate of technical sciences in specialization 235 mathematical and software support for computers, complexes, and computer networks to Gennady Dyk. Distinguished colleagues, due to the fact that our session is held remotely, I would like to ask if there are any comments on this organization of remote access. None? Okay. Now I can give the floor to our candidate for the finalizing remarks. I would like to thank everyone for the work, especially Professor Degtyaryov, who spent all these years, 12 or 13 years with me, with my work, and still managed to achieve something. I fully agree with all the remarks. Certainly, I'm a grown-up person. I understand that there are these drawbacks, and they are quite obvious, some of them, and even the questions that I got from Alexei Anatolyevich, really brought me to a deadlock, and this was so long ago. Certainly, there are mathematical apparatus right now, and asking something today is a bit is not that relevant, because certainly we forget We may forget something for all these years. Thank you so much for reading this work. Thank you so much for trying to understand it. I can't say that I'll just go and to correct the software, but still we continue working with colleagues. We continue working with this software with my colleagues, and we'll try to introduce certain amendments to the software. Maybe we'll shift to a different platform at some period of time. And thank you very much to the distinguished chairman for moderating this event. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Yes, and on behalf of the university, I would like to thank the members of the board for the work, this complicated work. I therefore close our session. I would like to thank everyone, and on behalf of the members of the board, I am going to congratulate our candidate for the award of the academic degree.